Joining us now, we're so lucky to have former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, how do you think our adversaries such as Russia and China will respond to Maduro's ousting?
Tommy, it's pretty rich to hear the Russians and the Chinese complain about the violation of international law. It's two of the biggest breakers of international law. The Russians invade all of Europe. The Chinese continue to conduct kinetic activities against the Indians, the Philippines. So we shouldn't take that with any level of seriousness. But I think they also can see now that they've picked the wrong horse. Right? They supported Maduro, and the Americans came in and just took him out. And I think every dictator in the world now can see that if you're counting on the Russians or the Cubans or the Chinese to protect you, you are on the wrong side of history. Second, I think they can all see now, like, damn, that was a pretty good operation. The Russians tried to take out Zelensky one night and failed miserably. We pull this off with incredible capability, incredible elan. The Russian air defense systems prove totally ineffective against U.S. firepower. And so I think all of those leaders can see that we still have the most capable, amazing military in the world, and we're prepared to use it when American interests are at stake.
Mr. Secretary, you were also the head of the CIA during President Trump's first term in office. They were involved in this operation. What can you tell us about that? And I also want you to turn towards Iran here, because it was just a couple of days ago. I mean, we've had a million events happen in just the past 48 hours. The President Trump drew a pretty strong red line about the protests there.
Yes, there's no doubt the Ayatollah was watching this as well, as would the senior leadership of the Iranian terror forces, the IRGC. They would have seen that when President Trump says, I'm going to be serious about protecting things that matter to America, he absolutely means it. And just like with Operation Midnight Hammer against Iran, he now has gone and taken a narco-terrorist out of Venezuela and brought him to the United States for prosecution. They can certainly see that this is a president that's serious about taking care of the things that matter to the American people. I'd also say the Iranians have both supported and defended Venezuela for an awfully long time. They count on Venezuelan oil and Venezuelan gold going back and forth. During my time as Secretary of State and CIA Director, I saw that. And now they're going to do their level best to make sure that the new leadership in Venezuela is no different. And if you ask me, the most important thing that the administration needs to do in the days ahead is make sure we don't end up with Venezuelan generals or Delcy Rodriguez, who is a Chavista through and through. If they end up in control with access to the weaponry and power in Venezuela, the Venezuelan people will not have advanced the important cause that President Trump gave them the opportunity for today.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, earlier today it was noted that the United States would be running Venezuela. Secretary Rubio addressed how our foreign policy has changed more broadly under President Trump. Take a look.
This is not a president that just talks and does letters and press conferences. And, you know, if he says he's serious about something, he means it. And this is something that was a direct threat to the national interest of the United States, and the president addressed it. There's a president of peace, by the way. I told you what I just said earlier. This guy had multiple opportunities to find his way somewhere else and figure out another. He could have been living somewhere else right now, very happy, but instead he wanted to play big boy. And so now, you know, he's got other sets of problems on his hands.
Pretty memorable quote there. Rich kind of touched on this, but do you think the rest of the world was sent a message not to mess with the U.S., specifically President Trump, today?
I think that's undoubtedly true. We saw that with him helping the Israelis have their success against both Hezbollah and Hamas, and against the Iranian regime. He's now seen this protecting America's interests in Venezuela. We've certainly seen him continue to help the Europeans get to the right place so that Ukraine and Kyiv can be defended against Russian aggression. I think undoubtedly what Secretary Rubio said there is true. I think the world knows, and we now have a president who understands both the limitations and uses of American power, but's prepared to use it for things that really do in fact matter.
You mentioned, Mr. Secretary, Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, and what do you make of the challenge that the administration may have now, specifically Secretary Rubio, who at that press conference said that, you know, he had spoken to Rodriguez and President Trump saying that she was going to be on board. But since then, later this afternoon, Delcy Rodriguez has really blasted, condemning the attack, saying that, you know, the Venezuela will never return to be a colony of another country. It just suggests that things may not go as smoothly as we were led to believe at the press conference.
Well, I'm certainly not privy to the conversations between the administration and Delcy Rodriguez, but I know exactly who Delcy Rodriguez is. She was with Chavez. She was with Maduro. These horses very rarely change their color. I don't expect that she would. Perhaps the military will put pressure on her. Perhaps there are people inside the military who are just done protecting these thugs. They stole 2 elections. We'll see where the military lands. But I can't imagine that someone who was a senior official in the Maduro administration and along with Chavez, so now decades, is someone who is going to deliver peace, freedom, and a good economic outcome for the people of Venezuela. I pray, I always hope as a Christian, we're always looking for conversion.
Right.
But it seems very unlikely
so
to me.
with that said, would you say that there could be a possibility of another operation if she tries to grab power and starts to cause chaos?
Boy, I suppose it's possible. What I really hope is the Venezuelan people will go to the streets and cry foul. They voted for a series of people. I'm happy if they have another free and fair election. If they do, I'm confident that the Chavistas will be voted out there. They've been decimated. I stood on the bridge at the edge of Venezuela inside of Colombia and watched these mothers come across with their young children who were starving. I was in Guyana. I was in the jungles of Brazil watching these refugees flee. The Venezuelan people deserve to have the people they voted for hold office, and that was not the folks that were working for Nicolás Maduro or Nicolás Maduro himself.
Mr. Secretary, President Trump gave us a bit of a history lesson today, explaining that this mission was an extension of the Monroe Doctrine. Take a look.
All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again.
I think that's true, Secretary Pompeo. What do you make of this, I guess, Trump doctrine and his approach to foreign policy? I think there were some Republicans and, of course, many Democrats sounding off on social media all throughout the day, saying this doesn't sound very much like America first, using his own words, or attempting to against him. What do you make of that?
Yes, I think we saw there's the old saying, talk softly and carry a big stick. I think we saw the big stick part of that today. There is no doubt, however, that this is deeply consistent with President Trump's version of America First. I lived it for 4 years, working alongside him and trying to deliver for him and for America. He took American interest at heart, protecting us from narco-terrorists that are killing Americans, Russian, Chinese, Iranian influence in Venezuela, the destruction of a once great nation that has the largest proven oil reserves, 300 barrels of crude oil offshore from Venezuela. They have the capacity to deliver really good outcomes for their people. It matters to America that they do. And he put America first by delivering an outcome that gives Venezuela back to its own people. And now the hard work is to make sure that this isn't squandered or thrown away. I pray that he can pull that off. I'm confident that he'll stay at it.
Mike Pompeo, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Tommy.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.